CrafTea, and today I'm going to be doing a video on how I made my beautiful two-tiered birthday cake. So quickly, I'm just going to insert a couple of photos of what my cake ended up looking like. I think it is just absolutely gorgeous. I love how it turned out, and I think it is probably my favorite birthday cake I've ever made. So yeah, without further ado, let me just get into all the steps that I did to make this cake. So I started by making 6 round cakes, 4 9-inch cakes, and then 2 6-inch cakes. I started by making my 4 9-inch cakes first. The ingredients that I used were cocoa powder, sugar, flour, baking soda, baking powder, salt, eggs, yogurt, oil, and vanilla extract. I started by taking my bowl and then I sifted in all the dry ingredients, which were cocoa powder, sugar. I sifted those and I found out that you should not sift brown sugar. Next, I added my flour, baking soda, baking powder, and salt, and whisked those through to get rid of any of the lumps. Then I cracked 2 large eggs into my bowl and gave it a quick whisk. The mix got stuck in my whisk, but it shouldn't be a problem if you use like a spatula. I then moved it into my stand mixer. I gave it a whisk for a couple of minutes, I'd say 2 to 3 minutes, until it was kind of a sandy texture. Then I added my yogurt. In the recipe, it's called buttermilk, but I use yogurt and it works just as well. Next, I added my water and gave that another whisk for a couple of minutes until it was nice and smooth. Then I added my 3 tablespoons of oil. I used olive oil, but you can use any oil. Then I added my teaspoon of vanilla extract and beat that until it was well combined. Once it was well combined, I scraped everything off of the mixer and then I started buttering my pans. I just used some regular salted butter and coated every side of the pan. You want to make sure you do this so the cakes do not stick. Next, I added some cocoa powder and then just tipped that all around the cake until the tins were completely covered. This is what they should look like when they are done. Then I started distributing the batter evenly between the 2 cake pans until the batter was all gone. And then I popped them in the oven at 350 degrees for 35 to 40 minutes. When they were done out of the oven, I just took a little spatula and scraped around the edges and dumped them out. They came out really nice and really pretty. I repeated this for a second batch, so I had 4 9-inch cakes. Next, I made my 2 6-inch cakes, and I only needed 2 since I was using a regular batch. It was going to make them super thick, so I could just cut them in half and make 4. I did the exact same steps by sifting the cocoa powder, the flour. I'm going to have the recipe down below if you'd like to follow along. I sifted the baking soda, baking powder, and salt. Then I added in my brown sugar, remembering that you are not supposed to sift brown sugar. Then I cracked my 2 large eggs in and then I gave it a nice little stir. Remembering my mistake of using an actual whisk in the last step, I used a spatula so it wasn't so messy. Then I added in my water, gave it a little mix after. As you can see, my little sister helped out here. And then I transferred it to my stand mixer. I like to do it outside the stand mixer and then in the stand mixer just so it doesn't puff up and make a huge mess. I whisked this for a little bit until it was nice and smooth. Then I added in my yogurt. And then I let that whisk for a little bit longer until it was all combined. Next I added in my 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and I let that beat for a little bit, and then I added my teaspoon of vanilla extract. And let that beat for a little bit longer, 2 to 3 minutes, until it was nice and smooth. Then I greased up my pans. I got some new pans because I didn't have any 6-inch pans, and I just took the wrapper of some butter. This is a good tip if you have some leftover butter. I just smeared it all over my pans. My little sister helped me with this. And then again, I just added some cocoa powder, spread that all around so the sides were all evenly coated so the cakes wouldn't stick. And then this happened. I have butter all over my fingers. It's really gross. Yeah, my little sister knocked over my camera and it really freaked me out because I was so scared that it was broken. Thankfully, it didn't break. It did ruin the lens though, so I had to get another lens, which is really expensive. Anyway, I just divided the batter evenly between the 2 pans, and they were so full. Usually you want them to be like half as full as these ones, but I knew they were going to make a super fluffy cake and I was going to cut them in half. Then I put them in the oven, 350 degrees, and these took so long to bake. I kept on having to check on them until they were ready.
That is still gooey.
It's like a grandma.
I checked on them like 5 times before they were ready. But finally they were ready. It took about 40 to 45 minutes, and surprisingly they weren't dry or hard around the edges at all. As you can see, I have these contraptions around the edges. This is supposed to help the cakes bake more evenly and not be hard around the edges, if you're wondering. I'll link a video down below that I saw this in, and I think it definitely worked because these cakes were not dry. I took off the metal wrappings and then I scraped around the edges and dumped them out. They were so beautiful, so fluffy, so high. I just really love them. And I love this size of cake. I think I'm definitely going to be making more 6-inch cakes in the future. Next thing that I worked on were the buttercream, succulents, and cacti. So to start off, I made some basic buttercream icing. I will link the recipe that I used down below. I just added some butter to my bowl and beat that until it was nice and creamy. Then I sifted in 3 cups of powdered sugar. You're going to end up adding 6 cups of powdered sugar, but I did it in 2 intervals so that it wouldn't explode all over my mixer. I'm scared that it's just going to explode. Then I transferred it back into my stand mixer, and again, to go along with the not exploding everywhere, I added on this attachment that is supposed to help your flour and stuff not explode out when you're baking, and it actually helped a lot. So I'd recommend putting this on if you have it. I let that beat until all of the powdered sugar was nice and well combined, and then I sifted in my other 3 cups of powdered sugar. Once I had done that, I added it back onto my stand mixer, again adding that little attachment, and then I let that beat until it was nice and combined. I then added my mint extract and my cream. I added mint to taste, and in a usual buttercream recipe, I'd usually use vanilla, but for this cake, I wanted it to be mint, so I just added mint extract. For piping buttercream, you want it to be a little bit thicker so it can hold its shape when you're piping it, so I added a little less cream. Then I divided my batter into 7 bowls and started dyeing them. I dyed this first one with some pink food coloring, and then I added just a tad bit of brown. I will link some videos down below that I found helpful for piping succulents if you're going to replicate this at home. The next color, I added some moss green to it. That is the only color that I used for this. I added it until it was like a nice darkish green. Then for the next green, I used a bit of Kelly green and moss green, and then a teeny bit of brown until it became this really dark, rich green. For the next color that I made, it was a tealy blue color. So I added some teal, and then I felt like it was a little too bright and it wouldn't blend in, so I added a little bit of Kelly green. I accidentally forgot to film this next color, but basically I just added a little bit of pink and purple until it became this really pretty pinky color. Next I made this orange color, and I made this by adding just a little bit of brown to my orange. And it made this really nice burnt orange color. And then for the last bowl, I added a little bit of pink and a little bit of brown and a little bit of purple until it became my perfect color. The next thing I did was start piping after I'd colored all of them. I used a whole bunch of different tips and I mixed the colors to make different variations of cacti and succulents. And as I said before, I'm not going to be going in depth on this. In fact, I'm just going to be doing a time lapse. But as I said before, I just made a whole bunch of different variations. I mixed the colors together in my bag, which I will be showing you how to do in a little bit. I will be linking some videos down below that I found helpful when I was trying to figure out how to make cacti and succulents, just because I think they are way more informative than this video will ever be. And I don't want this video to be like 10,000 hours long. As you can see here, I was just putting a little square of parchment paper on my piping nail, and then I piped on top of that. And that is just so when you take it off, you can put it in the freezer or something just to let it harden. And then when you put them on your cake, you just peel off the backing super simply. That's why you do that. Now, of course, there will be some fails along the way. I definitely failed with a couple of these cacti. So don't worry if some of yours don't look the best. You kind of want them to look sort of rustic and not like they're supposed to be perfect, you know? So keep trying until you get it. Here's how you do a two-tone piping bag. So I just put this on half of the piping bag. Basically I took this pink right here and I put it on one side of the bag, and then I'm going to put my green in the entire thing.
Wait, what number is it though? You should tell them.
It's the 104 tip. This just makes a whole bunch of different variation, and I don't know, I love how they look.
Because I can't see.
There we go. Ooh, that's pretty. If any of your succulents aren't turning out properly, just change the tip. And maybe it was just the tip. Maybe it'll turn out better once you change the This is what they look like when they were all done. I piped so many. I don't know how many I actually piped. When I'm editing this, I will count them and put it on the screen, but I made this many, and I only had about 5 left over once I had covered the desired amount of the cake that I wanted to cover. Next thing I did was level the cakes. Now this was a task, let me tell you. I had popped these cakes in the freezer because I had made them a couple of days before I was decorating them. So they were, I wouldn't say rock solid, but they were pretty solid. I didn't let them thaw enough. I thought they were going to be good, but apparently they weren't. So leveling them was not easy. If you watch any other baking videos, just see them cut it off super simply, and usually that's the case, but for these ones, it was way harder than I would have ever imagined. So I'd recommend if you froze your cakes that you let them thaw fully before you try to cut it off. As I mentioned before, I had a lot of trouble trying to level off these cakes, but eventually I got them all leveled nicely. I leveled off all of my 4 9-inch cakes. Then I started leveling off my 6-inch cakes. Now the only thing different about my 6-inch cakes were that I was going to level off the top, and then I was going to cut them in half since they were so thick. So I would end up with 8 layers. 4 9-inch and then 4 6-inch. The 6-inch cakes were way easier to level than the 9-inch cakes, probably because they had a little bit more time to thaw. So once I had leveled off the tops for the 6-inch cakes, I cut them straight down the middle. I should have probably used a ruler, but it ended up not being that bad. I tried to just eyeball it where I thought the center of the cakes were, and then I just chopped it right off in the middle. It wasn't as easy as that. I wish it was. So at this point I had 4 9-inch cake layers, and then I had 4 6-inch cake layers. Next thing I did was making the mint chocolate chip buttercream icing. That is a mouthful. I took the same recipe of the buttercream that I showed you before, and I added some of this moss green food coloring. Now you wouldn't think moss green would make a nice mint green, but this is the perfect mint green color. Then I took some Oreo cookies. Are they called Oreo cookies? That sounds really weird. Anyway, I just put a couple of Oreos into a little Ziploc bag, and I zipped it up. Now, my Ziploc baggie was not that strong, so it kind of busted a hole into it when I started baking it. We have a wooden mallet somewhere in our house, but I couldn't find it, so I used the end of a pair of tongs until the cookies crunched up into little bits. Next thing I did was the layering of the icing and the cake. So I took a little bit of my mint chocolate chip ice cream buttercream and smeared it on the cake tray that I had got. I actually made this out of a piece of cardboard, and then I just covered it in tin foil. And then I put my first layer of cake on and smeared about a ½ inch of icing onto it. My cakes were about 1 inch thick, so a ½ inch to 1 inch. You want it to be about half as thick as one of your layers of cake. Then I added on my second layer, third layer, fourth layer. You know the drill. Just stack it up. Icing in between each layer. You want to get these layers as smooth as possible, so when you put the final cake on top, it's nice and level. Once I was finished with the 9-inch cakes, I popped the cake in the freezer so it would firm up for the next step, and then I worked on my 6-inch cakes. It is the exact same steps for the 6-inch cakes, other than they're just smaller. So again, put my one layer down, and then a ½ inch of buttercream on top, stack another layer, and then another layer. You know the drill by now. I did forget to mention for the 9-inch cakes, but once I had layered every layer, I took my large scraper and scraped around the edges before I popped it in the freezer, just so there weren't any like big chunks of buttercream. You want to see some of the cake on the outside, so you don't want such a thick buttercream. So what you have to do is take the buttercream that you pre-made regularly and then add 2 more tablespoons of cream. I added, I think, 1 to start, and then it needed a little bit more, so I added another one, but definitely don't just add a ton at the beginning, or else it will be super liquidy, and I would never want that to happen to you. So once I had that down, I just smeared a little bit on the cake, and then I took my large scraper and started scraping around the edges. Now, for being a half-naked cake, this was really hard to get right. I am such a perfectionist, so I wanted this to be perfect. But once I got the sides relatively covered, I did the top. The top didn't have to be that smooth because another cake was going to be layered on top, but I tried to get it as smooth as I could. Once I was done the top, I added a little bit more to the sides and then scraped it. It was a lot of fixing and scraping and applying more and then scraping and smoothing and all that kind of stuff. And then I popped my 9-inch cake back in the freezer, and then I brought in my 6-inch cake and repeated these steps all over again. I'm not going to bore you by explaining it again because it's the exact same steps. I do have to say that the 6-inch cake was a lot harder to do than the 9-inch cake because it was a lot lighter, so it was sliding around on my turntable. And then the last step of actually assembling the cake, other than putting the buttercream flowers on, was layering the cakes together. For supports, I used 4 skewers. You probably want thicker skewers, but I found that these ones worked perfectly. I just cut them in half to be the same thickness of my cake. So much harder. And then I just pushed them in. As I said before, I used 4, and I think that worked out pretty well. This is what it should look like when you poked all your skewers in. And then it was time for the stressful part, the layering of the cake. Now, as you can see, I had a cake board underneath my 6-inch cake, and obviously you want to do that so these skewers don't just poke right through the cake. I didn't get it perfectly centered on the first try, so I picked it up and moved it a teeny bit to the right until it was perfectly centered. I mean, probably not perfectly centered, but it was good enough for me. That looks, yeah, that's not even in frame. And then I took some of the buttercream that we had used for the outside and put it into a piping bag with a small round tip, and I just piped a nice border around the middle and the bottom tiers. If you're doing the exact same cake as I did, you don't really have to do a border on the middle tier. It got covered up by the succulents that I put on there, but I don't know. I just did it for fun, I guess. I was obsessed how it looked after, and I was kind of scared that I was gonna ruin it with the succulents, but I was so wrong. I think it looks so much better with the succulents on than without. But this was so much fun making a layered cake, because now I know that I can actually make a tiered cake, and it turned out not horrible. Now, I do have to say, this part was probably the longest. I said the piping of the succulents was probably the longest, but I have a half an hour time lapse of me putting these buttercream succulents on the cake. It just took so long to decide where they were gonna get placed. It wasn't hard at all, it was just hard to decide where each thing was gonna go. But I just took the same icing that I had in my piping bag from piping the border, and I just squirted just a little bit of icing onto the cake, and then I added my solid buttercream succulents. Oh shoot, I forgot! Oh no. I had popped these succulents in the fridge for probably a day until they were solid. Now, I had to keep putting them into the fridge when they got cold because you cannot peel off the back when they start getting soft. It just becomes a mess. So in between, probably each 10 minutes, I popped them in the fridge, took them out, and then continued piping them on. The finishing step that I did, the last step that I did, was take the pieces of cake that I had cut off the top and used it as little fake pieces of dirt. And that is it, my folks. That is my finished cake. Cake is really working. Oh yeah, baby. Oh my gosh, I am so happy with it. I can't believe how long it took me, but I think the time was totally worth it, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. I know it wasn't that informational, but I still hope you got some entertainment out of it at least. If you did, don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe down below, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!